now. Okay, so today's webinar is about how can I reduce my community bills, energy bills, buildings energy bills now and in the future. We're very grateful to our three presenters today. Firstly, we've got Ryan Felber from Business Energy Scotland. Ryan's going to be giving us some top tips about how to reduce energy consumption right now. And then we've got Vary McSween and Graham McGrath from Local Energy Scotland. And they're going to be talking to us about how can I decarbonise my community building and make it more energy efficient. We were supposed to have Scottish Government talk to us about the utilities framework, which some of you might have already heard about. Unfortunately, they're not going to be with us today. They have actually suspended temporarily the utilities framework to any new customers. But I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about that later on, if that's okay. In terms of questions, if we can wait until the end of the speaker, and then if you want to either raise your hand or put something in the chat, and we can get those questions answered. So without any further ado, I am going to hand you over to Ryan. Ryan, off you go.
Yeah, thank you very much, Denise. Great to be along this afternoon. So yeah, my name's Ryan Felber. I'm one of the business energy advisors for Business Energy Scotland. And as Denise mentioned, I'm going to cover some top 10 tips of things that you can have a look at right now that can help you reduce your energy costs. So just share my screen. There we go. Hopefully that's come up okay. So very quickly, just to let you know who it is that I work for. So I work on the Scottish Government's programme called Business Energy Scotland. So we're funded by the Scottish Government. Our aim is to provide free and impartial support to SME-sized organisations across Scotland, really with the idea to help identify opportunities to reduce, save energy, reduce your carbon emissions, and at the same time, obviously saving some money. And we really help businesses identify those opportunities and take them through to kind of implementing on that. We were previously known as Energy Efficiency Business Support Service, so maybe a program that you have heard of us before. So today really it's just about covering some top 10 kind of no cost, low cost measures that you can implement to kind of reduce your costs. And as Denise mentioned, I'd be happy to obviously take a few questions at the end. So just want to start off with this, just to be clear, we are looking at kind of some behavioral techniques, some solutions of things that you can do right now. And that's all about what can you optimize what you've got. So we're not talking about putting brand new systems in, whether that's heating or kind of expensive measures. Some of them come under the category of where you can improve controls and things. And really it's once you've managed some of that you can look at things, bigger, larger improvements, which my colleagues from CARES will talk in their session. So the very first one, and this is kind of really good timing with this time of the year, is just making sure that we take full advantage of the natural daylight. And so the example you've got on there are with skylights, and you can see obviously clearly dirty skylights, not natural daylight coming through as it could be. Lighting needs to be on. In more practical cases, I mean, I was guilty of this morning when I came, I'm working from home, I came into my office, I put the lights on, it was still dark this morning, but the reality that within an hour, within 2 hours, I've got plenty of natural daylight coming on, my lights are off. So again, it's really good to think about throughout the whole day, there may be periods of the day where the lights do need to be on for whatever reason, but obviously if they can be turned off, that's a really important thing to do. If you're working in offices, then do have a think about the logistics. Have you got desks and workspaces where you can access natural daylight? Is there anything blocking this natural daylight? So curtains and things are drawn. Again, maybe overnight they've been drawn. Nobody opens up in the morning, the lights come on. So it sounds straightforward, but it's easy to get in habit. Just flick things on and they stay on. So do have a think about that. Have a think. Are you really kind of maximizing the natural daylight that's available on that? Okay. Second one is thinking all about heating, heating the buildings. One of the really important things, and again, most of you will probably have started putting the heating systems on, okay? And it's just thinking, how have you done that? So have you programmed the heating systems, or are they just on and off? When do those systems come on? And again, I'll give you the example. Yesterday afternoon, I'm based in Inverness, it was really sunny. So actually, had I programmed my heating to come back on the evening, it wasn't really needed. I didn't put my heating on last night. So we've got to really adapt, particularly this time of year where it's not automatically, it's cold. When do you need the heating? Where are the controls for that? Is it central controls? Have you got individual controls for different areas? And then obviously, very importantly, do all those areas need to be heated? So you might have, I don't know if you're a community group and you've got an event, something going on that evening, but nothing for the next day. So again, you want to program the heating to be on just for that. Have a think about when the heating comes on and how good your property or your building is at retaining heat. And by that, I mean, if you're starting at 9 and finishing at 5, for example, then obviously you'd ideally want the heating to come on a little bit beforehand. So when you arrive at 9 o'clock in the morning, the space is warm, but does that need to be on for an hour? Does it need to be on for 2 hours? Can it be on for just half an hour? So if it's only half an hour in the morning, that's great. Likewise, if you're turning off the heating manually because it's not controlled, well, you don't need to do that at 5 o'clock when you finish. The reality is you can probably turn that off at 4, even half 4, and then there's enough residual heat within your working space. So again, if we add half an hour each end of the day over several days, that can make a really big difference. The other one is really thinking about what temperatures you're setting at. And if you are kind of overheating areas, so it's too hot and the radiators are just left on, and just have a look on your screen, then we are talking about up to kind of 8% difference by a single degree. So this knock-on effect of trying to overheat the building by 1 or 2 degrees can make a huge difference on the costs. We do have a really cool kind of spreadsheet where you can start thinking about that. Use this template to record heat in different areas. The other one is really thinking about the hot water usage. And this is with an idea to obviously making sure there are no leaks and that the taps are running as they should be. A great example is thinking about, most of you will obviously have toilets and things out in there. Some of you may have the push taps. Okay, they're fantastic. They can be absolutely great because they will turn off the water naturally, but really good to think about if they are working correctly. And just to give you an example of that, then an ideal push tap should only last around 10 seconds. So if it's lasting much longer than that, then it's wasting water. You're better off having somebody push it again a second time rather than running for too long. And then it should take about 12 seconds to fill about 1 liter of water. So if it's filling it up much quicker than that, again, what we would deem as the flow rate is too high. And therefore, all this lovely hot water that you're paying for to heat is literally going down the sink. Okay, so they're minor tweaks, but do have a look at that on there. Obviously, the bigger cost is around the hot tap rather than the cold tap, but you are also paying for cold water in most cases. Do have a think about where the hot water is coming from. We've come across many businesses where they've got electric immersion tanks. They could be filling up really large tanks for maybe only a few taps. So do these tanks need to be left on all the time? If you're not there over the weekend or a couple Monday, Tuesdays, you don't use the premises, then you're probably better off making sure you turn that off and then reheating, putting it back on the day you're back in. Ideally, obviously a little bit beforehand because it'll take a bit of time to heat that water up, but that will be a lot cheaper than having that hot water constantly there for the 2 days. Again, some really good tools and checklists that we've got on our website for that, just to kind of help you in terms of doing a walk around and looking at areas where there's high water usage. Next one is thinking about draft proofing. And again, the best way to really think about that there will undoubtedly be spaces where you can feel a bit of cold air coming in. And again, as the weather's getting colder, that becomes more and more relevant. What we're doing is we're thinking that the other way. Okay, it's not great to feel some cold air in, but if you've got cold air coming in, that also means that you've got hot air. So air that you've heated or space that you've heated, the heat is escaping out of your building. And the reality is there's a staggering figure on there. So it could be as much as 15% saving by reducing the drafts that you have. You know, sometimes these gaps, and you have several of those, that's your hot air just literally going out the building. So making sure that where you can close doors and where you can make some improvements on the draft proofing. You can see on the picture there, that's one of the kind of recommendations, which is pretty cheap to do. You can either get some sealants to redo around the windows. The example there's a kind of adhesive foam tape. Again, you can pretty much buy that anywhere. By putting that around, that's really going to make a big difference. And you can go as far as putting drought excluders and things like that on doors. Again, you'll probably be very familiar with those. You can see those fire exit doors have got those, or any fire doors, you'll see those strips on there. It's that same idea. There's spaces of the doors that you could add those onto. This one's a hot desk, probably a little bit more initially relevant to maybe businesses that have got desk spaces, maybe different office spaces, maybe on different floors and things like that. Just have a think that there are a lot of people that are working from home at the moment. So office spaces or spaces are not being used the same way. So if there are opportunities to do what's called hot desking, so allowing people to work wherever they want in the building or in the same areas. This way you may only need to heat one office, one space. There's only 3 people coming in. There's 3 desks in there. So again, just thinking the logistics, do all the spaces that are there need to be used. If you're more of a kind of community group or something like that, and you've got your hall, and maybe some of the groups have got multiple halls, then again, have a think. If you rented one of the halls in the morning, then actually makes a lot more sense to use that same hall in the afternoon if you can, even if it's slightly bigger or smaller, as long as it obviously meets the requirements of whoever's coming there. But that space has already been heated, has already got some heat in there. So rather than letting that cool down and you're heating a different hall or different space, if you can do that with the logistics, and again, that's a really good way to do that. And I've kind of focused on heating, but it's going to be the same with the lighting. If there's spaces that are not being used and you can combine those spaces, then obviously the lights and things like that can be off in those areas. So this one is just kind of thinking about just staff awareness. And really what we're thinking about is, we've talked about lighting, we've talked about the heating and heating controls. It's really making sure that the individuals that you have coming into those buildings, whether it is staff or even visitors, have got an understanding how these things work. We found so many cases where there's only one guy who knows how to do the controls or how to change the heating, and therefore if he's on holiday or he's away or he can't come till tomorrow, then things don't happen straight away. So just sharing the knowledge, the information, how things work, what can be turned off when it doesn't need to be on, how to program the heating, maybe for different rooms, different spaces, then share that knowledge. The more people that know that, the more awareness there is, the better that can be managed and controlled. If you're slightly larger, then again, we've got a really good resource on there where you can add some of the things that are kind of tailored to your organization. There's a little quiz you can do. There's even a certificate on there, but kind of raising awareness about what you're doing. And if you are implementing some changes, for example, you're only putting lights on in one area at a certain point, or you're doing that, again, communicating that so people understand. We've been to several businesses, again, where it's automatic. Whoever comes in first in the morning, they put on all the lights. So they put on the lights in the little kitchen, they put the lights on in the bathroom, put lights in all the offices and things like that. If they start at 8 and everybody else is coming at 9, that's a lot of energy just for one individual. So again, just have a think about what needs to go on at what point. It was very validly raised yesterday in terms of health and safety. We're not saying turn lights off and create an unsafe environment, but do have a real think about, does it need to be on? When does it need to go on? So if you want to focus on the lighting, then we've got what's called a switch off campaign. So again, it is thinking about lighting and other appliances. So we've got a really good tool. This is about, you know, if you've communicated to people, this is just making it a little bit more interesting, sharing the knowledge. We've got collateral that you can use, whether that's stickers or posters, and you can really make a pushed effort. So it's a kind of natural thing. It becomes second nature that people automatically, if they leave a room, switch things off. If it's an office environment, turning off monitors at nighttime, not leaving them on standby and things like that. And there's some good ideas of how you can make that a little bit more kind of interesting and communicate that to any, well, team members and staff. Taking it a step further again for the lighting, some, particularly again, community halls have got quite complex lighting. Maybe things have been added. So there's maybe a panel of 5, 6 switches and which ones do what. So which are the front lights, maybe the back lights, the stage lights and things like that. So again, taking the time to correctly label those lights so it's quite clear what they do. Again, some switches are for external lights. People don't realize we've seen external lights being left on during the day and things like that. So again, we've got some really useful tools on there that you can access on that. Making sure people know where the switches are. And that might sound a little bit funny, but I did a couple of site visits and we went into this kind of large space. There was a laundry room and the lights were on. There was nobody in there. And we're like, okay, why are the lights on? Oh, well, they got switched on when the machines were on. Well, you'll know that machines are probably on for at least a good couple hours. So the lights were left on. And ironically, the person we were with didn't even know where the light switch was. So this is somebody working in their own little area. They know what they're doing again. So this kind of awareness and having some labels and people being clear where to turn things off is really useful. This one, most of you probably have a fridge with a community group, or in the office there'll be a kind of small fridge. So just there's some really good information from Love Food Haste Waste. So you can see the link on there. So if you want to look into a bit more, I guess some of the key things is really thinking about the temperature of the fridge. That can have an absolutely huge impact on the consumption. So we are talking a fridge normally should be around 5 degrees. On there. We're thinking a little bit about also the placement of items in there. So again, ideally the door is the kind of warmest space on there. So you'd be looking to put kind of ready to eat foods on the kind of top and middle shelves. The bottom shelves are really for your kind of raw meats and poultry and things like that, if you've got that. And then obviously the salad drawers for salads and things like that on there. Again, one of the little tips, and I think Denise won't mind saying it hit home yesterday with her, but it's easy to open the fridge, grab the milk, pour in your cup of tea, you're leaving the fridge door open just to put the milk back in. Well, that's at least a good 30 seconds if that's just one cup of tea, and if it's several, it's a little bit longer. So do really get in the habit, those few seconds of leaving that fridge door open, lets all the cool out, you shut it, it's going to work a lot harder, use a lot more energy purely to cool things back down to that temperature. So, you know, grab the milk, close the fridge door, pop your milk in your cup of tea, reopen it and pop it back in on there. This one, again, really important area, and this can really help you identify opportunities and patterns. And this is really just thinking about monitoring and measuring your energy usage. So there's 2 links on your screen. The bottom one, we have a really useful Excel template where you can just simply input your energy usage. It will even populate some charts, and that's for kind of whether you're on gas, oil, or electricity. It allows for those different fuel types. And what that can do is help you understand your usage. understand if there's very high usage at certain periods. So that could be overnight, where you'd normally, if the offices and things are shut, that's where you'd really obviously expect a drop in consumption. So if it's the same levels as during the day, then there's something going on. So you need to start thinking about, what equipment's being left on. Is there something that's running that shouldn't be? You can obviously identify patterns of wasteful behavior. So if all of a sudden there's a spike or change, what's caused that? If we're thinking, it could be just something's been left on, even if you thought you'd programmed it, something, whatever happened on there. So really good tools on there. We do also have our kind of profit monsters. And so they actually focus also on different areas. We've kind of mainly focused about energy, but obviously water and waste can be are areas of cost where there's opportunities for savings. So, if you want a little more, please feel free to have a look at that. Monitoring and measuring your usage comes hand in hand with making sure that you submit accurate meter readings where that's relevant to your energy supplier. Ideally, at least on a monthly basis, or at least if you want, record them internally, again, so that you can see any patterns, you can see any trends, you can see any spikes. If there are increases because you're busier, at least you can see that coming. It also allows you to make sure that your bills are as accurate as they possibly can be. We do see a lot of bills, and a lot of times they are estimates. That means the energy supply is estimated based on a previous usage, how much you're using, and that might not at all accurately reflect what you're using. That could be a good thing. You're overpaying now, you could be in credit, but the likelihood is you're probably using more than you're being charged for. And then we've had some business obviously being hit with horrendously high bills when it's finally kind of caught up and the meter readings are in. So please look at your energy bills, look at your usage, even if it's just on a monthly basis, monitor that, have an understanding what you use, and this way, any changes that you make, any cutbacks, again, you should be able to see that in those things being reflected. And then final one, I just wanted to let you know, we have a free Green Champion CPD certified training. It's a webinar. It takes place on the 3rd of next month between 10 and 12:30, so 2.5-hour session. In this session, we go in a lot more detail about enabling you to do a walk around your premises in terms to ways to identify opportunities, understand what could be done, a lot more detail about the energy bills, about water bills and waste bills, and things that you can do to understand those better, and obviously identify opportunities to reduce. So if you want to hear the sound of my voice as I'm doing the session with my colleague Kasia, then you'll be more than welcome to come along to that. Brilliant. So that's me. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take any questions.
Great. Thanks very much, Ryan, for that. I, for one, now close the fridge when I get my milk out of it as of yesterday. So anybody got any? Over to Barry and Graham from Local Energy Scotland.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Denise. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to give Barry a moment to get our presentation up, and then we'll get started. I'll be leading us for the first half, and then I'll be handing over to Barry. Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Barry. So as Denise mentioned in the beginning, we will be discussing ways in which you can decarbonize your building and improve its energy efficiency, taking it on from those kind of initial things that you can go out and do straight away that Ryan was discussing into more involved projects that involve changes to the building itself. So next slide, please, Barry. Thank you. So we are both local development officers at Local Energy Scotland. Local Energy Scotland is a consortium and of a number of different organisations which I've listed there, and together we deliver the Scottish Government's Community and Renewable Energy Scheme. So That's everything from community-owned energy generation projects like small-scale wind and solar, and increasingly, more recently, so there's a big focus on heat decarbonisation and looking at community buildings and how to make them more efficient and heated with renewable energy. So I cover Northern Highlands, Western Isles, Skye. Vary covers the Highland area, and you will have a development officer for your own the area which you live in, so feel free to go have a look on the website, and you can get some further advice off them if anything in this presentation you want to follow up on any of it. Next slide please, Vary. So when it comes to thinking about a building's energy use, it's really important to think about it in what we'd refer to as the energy hierarchy. So when you're looking at what ways in which you can intervene, the first thing you want to start with, which is at the bottom, the base of that pyramid, is reducing demand. So a lot of that is things Ryan has been just been discussing there about how to reduce the demand on energy in your building. Once you've addressed those issues, is then thinking about how you reduce losses. So that is, in the case of buildings, a lot of that's about insulation, and it can also be other things as well. And then finally, once you've addressed the losses, then you might want to start thinking about ways in which to generate your own renewable energy as part of your building. So next slide, please, Vary. This is going to form the structure of the presentation. And before we get going further, I just wanted to highlight that the best way to reduce your energy bills is really, and decarbonize your building, is really going to depend on what kind of a building it is you're in. It's quite, this presentation I'm going to be discussing general intervention measures and hopefully covering all bases, but the community buildings come in such a wide variety of types of construction and age, that the individual measures for each one will be very project specific. So I just wanted to highlight that. These photos are all from buildings that we've supported in the past, all the way from this church on the left to much more modern building on the right there. So I'll return to this slide at the end briefly. So next slide, please, Vary. So having just flagged there that it is difficult to give a picture of what a typical community building. I've pulled this bit of data from the Centre for Sustainable Energy, and that's maybe just a good way to frame your thinking about where your energy use is in this building. Worth highlighting that it is going to be very different depending on what sort of building you're in. So it's not going to be the same for everyone, but the general trends are going to be similar. So what you can see there is vast majority of the energy is going on space heating, followed by lighting, and then those other energy uses, water heating, things like that, generally tend to make up a smaller proportion of your energy use. So that's a good way of thinking about where to target your intervention measures in order to have the biggest impact. Next slide, please, Vary. So that first step in the pyramid, reducing demand, a lot of those tips that Ryan covered there are going to be very applicable here. A few additional ones: if you've got any uninsulated hot water pipe work on the inside of the building, very easy just to throw some foam tubing over that to insulate it better. As Ryan discussed, making more efficient use of the lighting that you do have. So as part of any retrofit work you might be doing, it might be possible to put in timers or programmers on your lighting or motion sensors. So for instance, areas like hallways or toilets where people are moving in and out of them could be beneficial. The big one there is also replacing any non-LED light bulbs with LED light bulbs. And move on to the next slide, please, Vary. So the next step in the hierarchy is about reducing losses. And when we're thinking about, this is heat specifically, where heat is lost from, I've taken this data from a typical domestic property, which is a typical gas heated detached 2-story building, but it's a good approximation again. And as you can see, that the majority of heat loss, 35%, is coming from the walls, and a further 25% from the roof. Those are the two big areas of heat loss. You do also have 18% loss from the windows, and then 8% lower loss from the floors. So the roof and the walls there, again, that's where you want to that's where you're going to have the biggest impact in terms of reducing energy loss and reducing, therefore, needing less energy to heat the building, and therefore reducing your carbon footprint and your energy bills. Next slide, please. So I'm now, just having done that little overview, now just going to talk about what different improvements you could potentially look at making to your building as part of any retrofit building works that you're doing to it. So starting at the top of that list there, that's the lowest cost, easiest things that you can do. Moving down the list, they get more expensive to install, and generally tend to be more disruptive to the building and the ability to use the building. So draft proofing, that's something Ryan covered, that you can go out and do yourself very easily. You could also think about secondary glazing, which is it can be all the way from a very basic, essentially, piece of cling film that you put over your window pane to again cut down on drafts coming in through it, to more temporary or permanent perspex glazing that sits behind your existing window that would maybe be more of a job for a professional to install. Moving on from that, loft insulation is also very straightforward in a lot of properties, not all properties. If you're in a church, it might be quite difficult proposition, but for more modern buildings, it can be very easy just to roll some insulation into the loft. Again, if there's any issues around damp or ventilation that you're concerned about, might be the something that you want to get professional advice on, or have installed by a professional. And then moving down, these different intervention measures tend to be more complex and more costly. Discussing what types of wall insulation you can do. If your community building is sort of post-interwar period, post-Second World War, it's very likely that it's going to have cavity walls. So that allows you to put in cavity wall insulation. This is relatively inexpensive, quite quick to do, so it can be a good option. Moving down, if you have a building which is much older, you won't have you're unlikely to have cavity walls, and therefore you'll need to do some form of internal or external wall insulation. Those are both very costly up front and quite disruptive to the building. They are very good, but in terms of how long for the upfront cost it will take to make back that saving on your energy bills, it is much longer, just because the upfront cost is much higher. If we could just move this slide on, Vary, hopefully the animation will come up. Excellent. So this green box there just shows you all the measures in that box, projects which we are involved in and fund. We will fund those measures. We don't fund double glazed windows or internal or external wall insulation, just because of the cost associated with it relative to the energy savings that you get. So just highlighting that they are quite complex measures. You'll notice I'm not discussing absolute numbers here in terms of costs and things like that. Just at the moment, it's partly because, as I say, it's going to be very different depending on what sort of building you're in. Some buildings are going to be a lot cheaper to retrofit than others. And also with the inflationary pressure that's on at the moment, we're finding the contractors that we deal with, each time we have a new building come through, the quotes are different and prices are going up constantly. Combined with that, obviously energy bills have risen significantly as well. So although the installation costs are going up, the potential savings you can make are also increasing as well. So it's worth bearing that in mind. Next slide, please, Vary. So just moving on to now thinking about the final step in the pyramid, which is generating. Once your building has reduced your losses and reduced demand, you might then want to think about ways to generate your own energy. a very one of the go-to ways to do that on a community building with a suitable roof would be installing solar PV panels. If you've got a south-facing roof, that's perfect, but they also work on east or west-facing roofs, and it can be if you have a suitable roof, it can be a very a quick installation project. Next slide, please, Vary. Combined with that, increasingly technology has really moved on leaps and bounds now, and installing solar PV with a battery it now makes a lot of sense. The key use for batteries in community buildings is so that when it's sunny during the day, perhaps you're generating energy in your solar panels, but you might not need the lights on, you might not need, if you have an electric-based heating system, you might not need the heating on, but in the evening, perhaps there's more usage in the building, you want to put the lights on, and that means that you can have stored that energy that was generated during the day and use it in the evening. So they can be a very effective combination. Next slide, please, Vary. And moving on from generating electricity, now thinking about generating heat. The go-to solution in a lot of buildings, if you want to generate your own heat renewably, will be an air source heat pump. These, if you're not familiar with them, operate a little bit like a fridge in reverse. So it compresses cool air, which increases the temperature of the air, and that's used to heat the building. These generally, compared to a standard electric heater, will have what's known as a coefficient performance of 1. So for each watt of power consumed, it produces 1 watt of heat. And air source heat pumps, they tend to have a coefficient of performance between about 2 and 5. So what that means is they're much, much more efficient than a standard electric heater. However, they're not suitable for all buildings. If you've got a very large, very old building with a lot of airspace to heat, they can be they cannot operate as effectively. And the effect that installing one of these will have on your energy bill will really depend on a wide range of factors. So these are not necessarily going to be cheaper to operate than a conventional heating system. So for instance, a gas-fired boiler in all circumstances. But for the correct building that's currently heated with an electric heater, they can be a really good option to have a more efficient way of heating your building. But this is one that you need to treat on we need to treat on a case-by-case basis, and I would always recommend you speak with your local development officer if you're considering looking into air source heat pumps. Next slide, please, Vary. Finally, on renewable heat generation, you can also have solar thermal panels to generate hot water renewably. These look an awful lot like solar PV systems, and often if you've got roof space, you're not going to have, it might not be the most effective use of space to try and install both solar thermal and solar PV. So you might be wondering which to go for. That really depends on what your building usage is like. Generally speaking, solar PV tends to be favored as there's a wider variety of uses for the energy that's generated, and they're a bit simpler to install as well. But we do support projects with solar thermal, and it can be useful technology. Final slide, please, Vary. So just going back to this slide that I looked at briefly at the beginning. As I mentioned, all these different technologies that I've run through aren't going to be suitable for every building, but there will always be a solution for the one that you're in. As I mentioned, older buildings like this church on the left tend to be more expensive to retrofit compared to a more modern building, just because of the construction, and also there might be various issues or hurdles to navigate around planning with regards to windows, things like that. So it's worth bearing that in mind. And you're now obviously thinking, I've run through all these different things that you can do to your building, but where is the money going to come from to do that, because obviously all these measures do cost money up front. So I'm now going to pass on to Vary, who is going to discuss how we can support you to start down the path on one of these types of projects.
Okay, thanks, Graham. Hi everyone, I'm Vary McSween. We've brought up the slide just to show, as we mentioned before, that there are lots of different development officers that cover all different areas. So I am based in the Highlands, but you can go onto our website or just contact Graham and myself and we can point you in the right direction for who's the most appropriate contact. Okay, just going on to the next slide here. So the best way that we can help at the moment is we have a current funding round, Let's Do Net Zero Community Buildings Fund. That can help with up to 80% of eligible costs, up to a maximum of 80,000 per site. So we can help with heat, renewables and energy efficiency. This is subject to funding open to March 2025 and projects have 12 months to complete following approval. As mentioned, we've got development officers that can help with this. And as Graham explained, sometimes we have more complex projects that aren't quite so straightforward. So in some instances, we will be able to bring in technical support as well for that. So we would allocate time out to that. So who's eligible? Village halls, community centres, community hubs, sports facilities and faith buildings. We've got different organisations such as Scottish Charitable Incorporated Organisations, private companies limited by guarantee, community benefit societies, community interest companies and organisations that are constituted but unincorporated can also apply to us. So the fund requirements, heating has become key, and so for this funding round we're now saying that you will be installing one of these core measures as part of the current project. So that's a heat pump, air, ground or water source with a heat distribution system, or a connection to a heat network. Or your building already has a heat pump, a connection to a heat network, direct electric such as storage heating or electric boilers, or biomass heating. So improvements eligible for funding, as discussed, the core measures, a heat pump, air, ground or water source, again, the connection to the heat network, but also we can look at solar photovoltaic panels if the heating requirement has been met, or solar water heating, again, if the heating requirement's been met. So if you've got the core measures, you can also look at add-on measures. So we've got energy storage, we talked about batteries in some of our case studies, we've got heat, thermal or electrical. Also insulation, again, we discussed loft, underfloor or cavity wall insulation, secondary glazing, draft proofing, replacement of LED bulbs and smart controls. As we mentioned, we don't cover the more complex measures such as putting in double glazing or going for the internal or external wall insulation. But we do work quite closely with Business Energy Scotland, and as some of you may know, if you've had a report from them, there are some measures that they may be able to help with that we don't cover here. So just to give you some examples, we've got Loch Ness Hub in Drumnadrochit, so they put in PV and an air source heat pump. Ardross Hall put in PV. They're also now considering battery. They just wanted to monitor for a year and see how they got on. We've got Findon Hall who put in PV and air source heat pump, and Roybridge School Project who put in a 14 kilowatt air source heat pump. So we've had lots of different types of buildings through, and it's really good to see how they've all progressed through with our installs. We also had a CARES conference online recently, and that was really good just for community groups getting together and sharing lots of information on how they found going through the process. And I've taken away some of the key points that I thought were useful to share here on working with contractors and overcoming barriers to remoteness. So the first thing most of them said was know your project, tailor to your needs and what will meet them, and understand the demand and scale. So it's really useful to get things like energy audits or speak to as many installers as you can, and just understand where you're going with the project. So gather information to get the confidence to say no to things that you don't want, as well as what you're going to go forward with. Finding the right people was important. So now that we can get out and about again, maybe going to expos, listening to recommendations. The Energy Saving Trust has got a good tool online for getting recommendations on installers, and throwing the net wide, especially at the moment, as we mentioned, prices are going up. It's also quite hard to get hold of installers because they've got an increase in demand, and they're also struggling to get components. So that's making it harder to then get the installs in. So we have great tools again on our website, or we can share that with you. So to set up an email to go out to contractors to know exactly what you're asking for, and putting that out to as many as possible. So not just 1 or 2, we actually require 3 ideally for our funding, but trying to get out there to as many people as possible. But not just that, it's thinking about what will happen next. So managing expectations with installer is really key. The amount of time needed to stay, especially if it's in a remote area. We've heard stories of installers going out and not realising what times ferries go back, not realising how long it's going to take, and then not finishing the job and going home without completing, and then having to arrange them to come back, which is always hard to schedule in at the best of times. So just making they fully understand what that will involve. And then making it attractive to them. Is there other organisations and projects nearby installing that might be able to do a few at a time? Could you offer them accommodation, hospitality, even storage space if it's a larger project and they've got lots of equipment to bring? And a main one is persistence is key. As we said, it can be quite hard going through that process of getting the quotes, but just keeping that communication going, making sure you're constantly in touch, saying what your expectations are and when you're hoping to install and what you're looking for, especially letting them know if you have funding or you're going for funding, how key that is to your timelines and your project. So not just funding as well. As mentioned, we can help with technical advisors and consultant support. One of the case studies that we put up before was actually air-to-air heat pumps. These aren't accredited by MCS, or often aren't, which is a requirement of our funding. So we can do internal checks as well and go through and make sure that everything's going to be as it should if you're going ahead with a project such as this. We also do that when we're looking at PV and batteries, just to make sure everything's viable and the project's going to work. Our website is packed with resources, including case studies, reports, and downloadable information. As I mentioned, we just had the CARES conference, so that's now up on YouTube. So again, we can send out information on that to anyone interested, but it was a really good chance to hear all the different sessions on case studies, looking at not just from the community angle, but also from the contractors and developers as well. And I would encourage you to sign up to our newsletter. Again, we can share this, but that's a really good way of making sure that you're up to date with all these news and events. So it's always a good idea to make sure you're aware of other funding as well. We obviously offer up to 80%, and a lot of people are looking for match funding. I've put up some examples here, but a lot of these can be specific to areas or only available for certain times. So a good one to look at is SCVO, the Scottish Funding Updates. They've got a great database that's got all the upcoming and new funding as it becomes available. Sometimes it's a good idea, as we mentioned, speaking to your development officer, because they might be aware of something that you're not at the moment. So for example, in the Highlands last year, we got match funding for our projects from HIE, Highlands and Islands Enterprise. So that was just for a specific time, but as I say, there might be something that's available when you're looking to do your project. Okay, so I've just put up some information to contact us. We've got all the usual ones and social media as well. So again, if you've not had time to look at this, we can put that on to you later on. And now Graham and myself are more than happy to take any questions.
So we talked earlier about the Scottish Government Utilities Framework. I don't know how much everybody knows about that. But basically it's a scheme where third sectors can apply to join via an agency agreement to benefit from the tariffs that the government negotiates every year. This year, 2022-23, the unit prices are, as I've got on the slide, for gas 5.26p per kilowatt hour, for electricity 8.043 pence per kilowatt hour. The two suppliers are EDF for electricity and Total Energies for gas. Now that is quite a competitive rate, probably to what you're all experiencing currently. Unfortunately, as I said earlier, there is a suspension at the moment from taking on any new customers, but we're keeping an eye on it. And when they do reopen, we'll make sure that we get in touch back with our members and with our cost clients, just to let you know. In the meantime, you might or might not have heard the government announcement a couple of weeks ago that there is a business energy bill relief scheme, which came into effect from the 1st of October, and it runs until the end of March 2023. It's an automatic discounted rate, which is applied by your supplier. So you don't need to do anything. It will automatically be applied by your supplier as long as that you're eligible for the scheme. And eligibility is basically if you're on a variable rate now, or if you fixed your price after 1st of April 2022, you should be eligible for it. But I've put the link on here and it's a fact sheet. If you go on, have a look at that link, that should tell you a little bit more about the scheme and what you're going to be eligible for. The third thing I just wanted to say is if you are thinking about changing, we have a very good relationship with Touchstone Energy Services. I put the details again onto my slide here. They're very good in answering questions. They don't just do the changeover for you, but any questions, any queries, they're very good to deal with as well. So I'm going to stop sharing at this point. Oh, let's have a look. There we go. And say thank you very much to everybody for attending. Thank you very much for our three speakers for giving us two sessions, one yesterday and one today. I think we've had nearly 90 people in total turn up to the session. So it's obviously a topic that people are really interested in at the moment. So again, thank you very much. And that's the end of the session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Denise.
Okay. Take care, everybody.
Thanks all. Cheers.